Is this some kind of joke? The guard's voice, sharp and laced with disdain, cut through the solemn morning air. He stood with his arms crossed, a human barricade in a crisp dress uniform, blocking the grand entrance to Arlington National Cemetery. His partner, a man of similar youth and arrogance, smirked beside him. Before them stood John Miller. At 87, his frame was stooped, his hands weathered by time, and his face a roadmap of a life lived long and hard. He wore a simple dark suit, threadbare at the cuffs but impeccably clean. It was the only one he owned. He didn't flinch at the guard's question. His gaze, clear and steady, remained fixed on the green hills beyond the gate, where the flags flew at half-mast. He said nothing, his silence a stark contrast to the guard's aggressive posture. The younger guard stepped forward, his polished shoes crunching on the gravel. "Sir, this is a private funeral for General Wallace. Invitation only. I need to see your credentials, or you need to leave." The confrontation hung in the air, a sour note in a place dedicated to honor. The guard was a wall of rules and regulations, seeing only a confused old man who had wandered into the wrong place. He couldn't see the history standing before him, the living testament to the very values the cemetery was built to commemorate. The tension began to coil, tight and dangerous, as more cars, long, black sedans with government plates, began to arrive, their occupants casting curious, pitying glances at the old man being held at the gate. John Miller simply waited. He had waited through worse. The younger guard, whose name tag read Jennings, sighed with theatrical impatience. "Look, Grandpa, I don't have time for this. The motorcade is arriving soon. You're creating a security issue." He gestured vaguely down the road. "If you want to visit a grave, the public entrance is a mile that way. Now, are you going to move along, or do we have to make you?" John's voice, when it came, was quiet but carried a surprising weight, like stones worn smooth by a river. "I'm here for the general. He would have wanted me here." The second guard, a man named Corporal Davis, let out a short, humorless laugh. "Right. You and the general, best pals, I'm sure." "Sir, with all due respect, General Wallace was a 4-star. He advised presidents. He didn't have time for people without an invitation." The insult was clear, wrapped in a thin veneer of formal address. A small crowd of mourners had started to gather at a respectful distance, their curiosity piqued by the standoff. They were a collection of high-ranking military officers, somber-faced politicians, and grieving family members, all dressed in formal black. Their whispers were a low hum beneath the guard's sharp tones. John could feel their eyes on him, a mixture of pity, annoyance, and embarrassment. It was a familiar feeling. He had spent a lifetime being underestimated, being invisible. It was, for the most part, a role he preferred. But not today. Not here. "My name is John Miller," he said, his voice even. "Just tell them John Miller is here." Jennings took a step closer, his personal space violation deliberate and intimidating. "John Miller. Okay, and I'm the Secretary of Defense. Names don't mean anything without the right paperwork, old-timer." He pointed a gloved finger at John's chest. "You have no medals on your suit, no ribbons, no proof of service. As far as I'm concerned, you're a civilian trespassing on federal property during a restricted event." The accusation hung in the air. No proof of service. John's hand subconsciously drifted to his side, where he could feel the phantom weight of things long since discarded, of burdens carried and set down. He had proof, just not the kind that could be polished and pinned to a lapel. His proof was etched into his bones, carved into his memory. A junior officer, a crisp second lieutenant with a face too young for the bars on his shoulders, strode over from a nearby security checkpoint, drawn by the commotion. "What's the holdup, Corporal?" "This man, sir," Davis said, gesturing toward John, "refuses to leave. Claims he's a friend of General Wallace. No invitation, no credentials." The lieutenant looked John up and down, his gaze lingering on the worn fabric of his suit and the scuffed toes of his shoes. His assessment was swift and dismissive. "Sir, you are disrupting a state funeral. I am giving you one final order to vacate the premises immediately." The lieutenant's tone was one he had practiced in a mirror, an attempt to project authority he had not yet earned. John's patience, a reservoir deep and vast, was finally beginning to run dry. "I'm not leaving," he said, the words simple, absolute. The lieutenant's face hardened. "Then you are under arrest for trespassing and interfering with a military ceremony." He nodded to the guards. "Escort him out. If he resists, cuff him." As Jennings and Davis moved to put their hands on John's arms, the lieutenant noticed something on the old man's lapel. It was a small, dull piece of metal, no bigger than a dime, pinned crookedly to the fabric. It was misshapen, tarnished, and looked utterly worthless. The lieutenant sneered, reaching out and flicking it with his finger. "What's this supposed to be? Your special prize from the Cracker Jack box. The moment the lieutenant's finger touched the metal, the world dissolved. The manicured lawns of Arlington vanished, replaced by the sucking mud and torrential rain of a jungle half a world away. The air, once filled with the scent of cut grass, was now thick with the metallic tang of blood and cordite. The muffled sobs of the mourners became the desperate screams of wounded men. A young captain, his face smeared with grime and fear, lay pinned under a fallen banyan tree, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. That young captain was David Wallace. He was trying to hand a piece of jagged metal, still warm, to a young John Miller. His hands, covered in his own blood, trembled. "Keep this, John," Wallace had rasped, his voice tight with pain. "It's not regulation, it's not official, but it means more than any medal they'll ever mint. It means you were there. It means you saved us." The vision shattered. John was back at the gate, the sun bright in his eyes. The lieutenant was still smirking, oblivious. But something had shifted in John's expression. A flicker of fire from a long-banked ember now burned in his eyes. He gently pushed the lieutenant's hand away from the pin. "Don't touch that," he said, his voice low and dangerous. The escalation had reached its peak. The guards, emboldened by their officer, grabbed John's frail arms. The small crowd gasped. The humiliation was absolute, a public shaming of a man whose only crime was wanting to say goodbye to a friend. But not everyone in the crowd was merely watching. Standing near the back was a young army captain, a man named Hayes. He had been observing the entire exchange with a growing unease. He had served 2 tours overseas, and had seen enough to recognize the quiet, unbreakable stillness of a true combat veteran. It was in the way the old man stood, the way he absorbed the insults without flinching, the way his eyes seemed to look straight through the chaos in front of him. Something was profoundly wrong. When the guards put their hands on John, Captain Hayes knew he couldn't stand by. Direct intervention was impossible. It would be a career-ending mess of insubordination and jurisdictional chaos. But he could make a call. He discreetly pulled his phone from his pocket, his thumb flying across the screen. He had a number, a direct line to a man who had been General Wallace's right-hand man for 20 years, Colonel Markinson. He moved away from the crowd, turning his back to shield the call. "Sir, it's Captain Hayes," he said, his voice low and urgent. The colonel's voice on the other end was strained, busy. "Hayes, what is it? We're 5 minutes from the procession. Is there a problem with the honor guard?" "No, sir. It's at the main gate. There's an incident. Security is detaining an elderly man trying to get in." Markinson's sigh was audible. "And this requires my attention. Why?" "Let security handle it. They have their orders." "Sir, he says he knew the general. He gave his name as John Miller." Hayes paused, then added the detail that had been nagging at him. "Sir, he's wearing a small, tarnished pin on his lapel. It's misshapen. It looks like a piece of shrapnel." There was a sudden deafening silence on the other end of the line, the kind of silence that speaks louder than any shout. The ambient noise of the command post, the radio chatter, the shuffling papers, it all faded away. Captain Hayes held his breath. When the colonel's voice returned, it was completely transformed. The annoyance was gone, replaced by a raw, naked urgency that made the hair on Hayes's neck stand up. "Captain, what did you say his name was?" "Miller, sir. John Miller." The line went dead. Hayes looked up just in time to see the guards beginning to drag the old man away from the gate toward a waiting security vehicle. He was too late. Inside a command tent set up 100 yards from the ceremony, Colonel Markinson stared at his phone as if it had electrocuted him. He slammed it down on the table, his face ashen. An aide, a young major, looked up, startled. "Sir, is everything all right?" "Get me General Peters," Markinson barked, his voice a low growl. "Get him on the radio. Get him off the reviewing stand. I don't care. Do it now." He began pacing the confines of the tent like a caged tiger. He ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. John Miller, after all these years. General Wallace had spent the last decade of his life trying to find him, to thank him one last time. He had left explicit instructions in his final letter, a letter Markinson now held in his desk. "If a man named John Miller ever comes looking for me," it read, "give him whatever he asks. He is owed a debt that this nation can never repay." The major was back, holding a radio handset. "I have General Peters, sir." Markinson snatched the radio. "General, this is Markinson. We have a code Shepherd at the main gate. I repeat, code Shepherd is active." The radio crackled. The voice of the highest-ranking active duty officer in attendance, a 4-star general named Michael Peters, came through, stripped of all ceremony. "Say again, Colonel." "Shepherd? That's not possible." "It's him, sir. The description matches, the pin, the name. It's John Miller, and security is in the process of arresting him." The response was instantaneous and glacial. "Halt everything. Halt the procession. I'm on my way." Back at the gate, the young lieutenant was savoring his victory. He had restored order. He had removed the nuisance. He leaned against the stone pillar, watching with a smug expression as his men manhandled the old veteran. He decided to deliver one final crushing blow to the old man's dignity. He walked over to John, who stood between the two guards, his shoulders slumped not in defeat but in a profound, weary sadness. The lieutenant got right in his face, his voice dripping with condescension. "Last chance, old man. You can walk away from here with your pride, what's left of it, or you can spend the rest of General Wallace's funeral in a holding cell. We'll charge you, and I'll personally recommend a full psychiatric evaluation. A man your age, with your delusions, you're a danger to yourself and a public embarrassment." He sneered, his words a final twist of the knife. "You want to pay your respects? You can do it from behind bars while you try to remember your own name." This was his overreach, the final unforgivable act of arrogance that sealed his fate. He had pushed a man of honor past the breaking point of humiliation, and in doing so had crossed a line from which there was no return. It started as a low rumble, a vibration felt more in the chest than heard with the ears. It was a sound wholly out of place in the quiet reverence of Arlington. Every head turned, including the lieutenant's. Cresting the hill was a motorcade of 3 black Chevrolet Suburbans, their tinted windows reflecting the morning sun like obsidian mirrors. They weren't moving with the slow, dignified pace of the funeral procession. They were moving with the speed and terrifying purpose of a rapid response team. They screeched to a halt just feet from the gate, their tires spitting gravel. The lieutenant and his guards froze, their hands still on John Miller. Doors flew open with military precision. Out stepped not military police, but 6 men in immaculate army dress blues. They were sergeants major, colonels, men whose chests were heavy with so many ribbons and medals they clinked softly with every movement. Colonel Markinson was the first one out, his face a mask of cold fury. Then the rear door of the lead vehicle opened. Out stepped General Michael Peters. He was a tall, imposing man, with 4 silver stars gleaming on each of his shoulders. The air itself seemed to grow still and heavy. The ambient noise of the cemetery, the wind in the trees, the distant traffic, the hushed whispers of the crowd, all of it ceased. There was only the sight of this 4-star general, his presence sucking all the oxygen from the air. The lieutenant felt a cold dread wash over him. He and his men instinctively snapped to attention, their hands falling away from John Miller as if he were suddenly radioactive. General Peters didn't spare the lieutenant or his guards a single glance. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, scanned the scene until they found what they were looking for. They landed on the stooped figure of John Miller. The general's entire demeanor changed. The hard, commanding aura dissolved, replaced by something else entirely, a look of profound, almost reverent respect. He began to walk, his polished boots marking a slow, deliberate rhythm on the pavement. He walked past the terrified lieutenant, past the stunned guards, past everyone, his path leading to one man and one man only. He stopped precisely 3 feet in front of John Miller. In the dead silence, General Peters drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight. He raised his right hand to his brow, not in a casual gesture but in the sharpest, most impeccably executed salute the lieutenant had ever witnessed. It was a salute of ultimate respect, a gesture of deference from a 4-star general to a civilian in a threadbare suit. His voice, a command voice that had addressed armies and advised presidents, boomed across the grounds, clear and unwavering for all to hear. "Mr. Miller, it is an honor, sir." The lieutenant, utterly bewildered, finally found his voice, stammering. "General, sir, I apologize for the disturbance. This man was causing a scene. He had no authorization to be here." General Peters' head snapped toward the lieutenant. He didn't lower his salute, but his eyes drilled into the young officer, a glare so intense it felt like a physical blow. "He has more authorization to be on this ground than you or I will ever have, Lieutenant." Then, turning his attention slightly to address the entire now silent crowd, the general kept his hand fixed in his salute and began to speak. His voice was a resonant baritone carrying the weight of history. "For those of you who do not know, let me tell you who you are looking at. You see an old man, you see a civilian, but I see a giant. This is John Miller. To the history books that name means nothing. But to the men of the 5th Special Forces Group, to the first operators of Delta, and to the man we lay to rest today, General David Wallace, he was a legend known by another name, the Shepherd." A collective gasp went through the crowd. The name was whispered, a piece of battlefield folklore, a ghost story told by old soldiers. "This man," the general continued, his voice rising with passion, "went into places that don't exist on any map, to rescue men the government had written off as lost. He wasn't a soldier in the traditional sense. He was a medic, a pilot, a navigator, and when he had to be, a warrior of unmatched ferocity. He never wore a rank, he never accepted a commission, and he refused every single medal offered to him. He said the only reward he needed was seeing his boys come home. The general took a step closer to John, his eyes shining with unshed tears. In the spring of 1968, a helicopter carrying a dozen Green Berets was shot down deep in enemy territory. One of the survivors was a young captain named David Wallace. For 3 days they were surrounded, outnumbered 10-1, with no hope of extraction. But on the third night a single man came for them. Through the jungle, through enemy patrols came the shepherd. He carried half of those men out on his own back. John Miller right here. He is the reason David Wallace lived to become the great man we honor today. The general finally lowered his salute, but his eyes never left John's. He gently pointed to the tarnished pin on John's lapel. "You see this piece of metal? This trinket you mistook for garbage," he said, his voice now a low growl directed at the lieutenant. "This is a piece of shrapnel from a mortar shell that landed 3 feet from Captain Wallace." John Miller threw himself on top of Wallace, taking the blast that would have killed him. David Wallace forged that piece of shrapnel into a pin himself, and he called it the Medal of Shepherds. It is the only one ever made. It is the highest honor a man like him could ever bestow. The vindication was total and absolute. The crowd was no longer staring with pity but with awe. The soldiers in attendance, from privates to colonels, began to slowly, one by one, raise their own hands in salute to the unassuming old man. The lieutenant's face had drained of all color. He looked as though he might be physically ill. He and his guards had not just made a mistake, they had committed a sacrilege. General Peters finally turned his full undivided attention to the lieutenant and the 2 guards. His voice dropped to a quiet, lethal register that was somehow more terrifying than his parade ground boom. "You asked him for his invitation," the general said, his words precise and cutting. "Let me be clear. Every single headstone on that hill is his invitation. Every flag flying at half-mast is his personal welcome." He took a step toward them, and they flinched as if he had raised a hand. "You demanded to see his medals. Lieutenant, the scars on this man's body are a testament to a brand of courage your rulebook could never quantify. He wears his valor in his heart, not on his chest. Your job is security. But your most essential tool isn't your sidearm or your radio. It is judgment. It is discernment. And in that you have failed on a scale that is staggering. You stood in the presence of living history and saw nothing but a nuisance. You mistook a titan for a trespasser." The general's gaze was relentless. "You will report to my aide. You will give him your names and your units. And you will be in my office at the Pentagon at 0600 tomorrow morning for a conversation about the true meaning of respect. Is that understood?" "Yes, General," the 3 men mumbled in unison, their faces masks of shame. Just as the general was about to turn away, John Miller, who had been silent through the entire ordeal, reached out and placed a gentle, weathered hand on the general's uniformed arm. "Michael," he said softly, using the general's first name. "They were just kids, doing their job the only way they knew how. Let it be." The general looked down at John, his expression softening. He nodded slowly. Then John turned and looked directly at the young lieutenant. There was no anger in his eyes, only a deep, profound wisdom. "Son," John said, his voice kind, "that uniform you wear, it doesn't automatically grant you respect. It's a symbol, a promise. Respect is something you earn, every single day, by how you treat people. And you need to understand that sometimes the most important people, the ones who have sacrificed the most, wear no uniform at all. Just remember that." As John spoke those words, the memory of the pin's creation bloomed fully into view. It wasn't a chaotic flash this time, but a clear, poignant scene. A makeshift field hospital smelling of antiseptic and death.